I might just start by turning my video off just so you can see the interesting people. And then we'll get, as I said, we've got some fantastic Fulbright alumni here to talk about their experiences with the application and the program. I might start with Giri, if that's okay. If you could just introduce yourself. So Giri was he was a 2018 Fulbright South Australia Scholar. So he was selected as the sponsored award because his research had significant potential to provide benefits for South Australia. And it's sponsored by the South Australian government and all the universities in South Australia. So Giri, thanks for joining us. Could you tell us a little bit about just where you're from and
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me, Alex, and good morning, everyone. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. From Adelaide, I'm an ear, nose and throat surgical trainee and a PhD candidate at the University of Adelaide. And I was really lucky to have got the Fulbright Scholarship, which allowed me to conduct 12 months of research at Stanford University in California. And my research focused on new imaging techniques using fluorescence to help guide us during head and neck cancer surgery. Yeah, I did that last year and had a wonderful year. It's great to be back now.
Thanks, Giri. So Nina was our 2020 Fulbright postdoctoral scholarship sponsored by Monash University. Thanks for joining us, Nina.
Thank you for having me, Alex, and good morning, everyone. So my name's Nina. I am a postdoctoral research fellow. I'm also a clinical and forensic psychologist. So I'm based at Swinburne University of Technology in Melbourne. So I finished my doctorate in 2017, and originally the plan was for me to be gearing up for my kind of Fulbright program next month. But at the moment, it's looking more likely that that'll kind of commence in around January. So I'll be heading over to John Jay College of Criminal Justice in New York. And my program is for around 6 months, and it'll look at the relationship between experiences of childhood abuse and neglect and subsequent engagement in violent behaviour over the lifespan.
Excellent. Thanks, Nina. So Adam was our 2019 Fulbright Professional Scholar in Nonprofit Leadership, which is funded by the Centenary Foundation and supported by the Australian Scholarships Foundation. Adam, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Alex. It's a pleasure to be here, as always, with the Fulbright family. I'm a proud Aboriginal man, grew up in southwest Sydney and in a country town called Wagga Wagga, halfway between here in Sydney and Melbourne. And for the past 15 years, I've worked in the not-for-profit sector. The last 10 of those years being with Career Trackers, a not-for-profit organisation that creates internships for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander university students. And as mentioned, I was a professional scholar in the Not-for-Profit Award, which is, I think, an incredibly visionary award, something I've been obviously excited about, but particularly lucky that I finished my program at the end of last year and came back amid the crisis that we're now entered into. So I look forward to sharing any insights I can that would be helpful.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Adam. And finally, we have Hannah Etchells, who was our 2018 Fulbright Western Australia Scholar. Again, just like Giri, selected because her research had significant impact, potential for impact for Western Australia specifically. And that award's sponsored by Western Australian Government and all the universities in WA. Thanks so much for joining us, Hannah.
Hi, thank you so much, Alex. And again, apologies for being late. I had some internet dramas right at the last minute this morning. And it is a little earlier over here, so we're 2 hours behind you guys. So it was a bit of a frantic trying to get my coffee and trying to fix my internet. So thank you for your patience.
No worries.
So yeah, I did my Fulbright in 2018. I study fire ecology. And I don't know if you guys remember, 2018 in California was the most catastrophic year they had for wildfires in history, followed by, you know, what happened in 2019 in Australia. So it was an incredible sort of timing to be sort of between two places studying something so significant and so critically important. I did it as a PhD or postgraduate scholar, sorry. And so I did it as a part of my PhD, where I took some time out of my PhD and went over and did 7 months as a small research project at the University of California in Berkeley. So it was awesome.
Excellent. Thanks so much. And obviously, you know, the selection committees did their job well, because as Hannah pointed out, a very, very crucial area of research, and you know, almost prescient in how crucial it was, how specifically it impacted us over the past couple of years. So I thought I might do this a little bit differently and we'll go through your experiences and thoughts in a sort of chronological order, as far as I'd like to hear from each of you about how you first learned of the Fulbright Scholarship and why you decided to apply. So let's go in reverse order. Hannah, where did you first learn of Fulbright, and why did you decide to apply?
So I guess my earliest memory of what a Fulbright actually was, the first time I heard the word and looked into what it was because I'm a really huge Paul Simon fan, and there's a song called I Know What I Know that has a line that says, "Aren't you the woman who was recently given a Fulbright?" Yep. And I'm a bit of a lyrics geek, so I always look things up and figure out what they mean, and legitimately I was about 16, I guess, when I looked it up and was like, that's so cool, then forgot about it for a while. And then as a PhD student, was looking at ways that I could give my research more of an international collaborative angle in an area that obviously is very internationally important. And it was the perfect fit for me. Basically, I remember reading the selection criteria and being like, oh wow, like, this is me and the Fulbright are a really, great fit for all of those reasons, I guess. And then, I was like, oh, that's the one from the Paul Simon song. How cool.
Excellent. And so you applied in 2017, was it?
Correct. Yeah. So at the beginning of this time earlier than this, 2017, obviously, there was a bit of a pushback this year, wasn't there, with the applications?
Correct. Yeah.
So it was first thing, 2017, the beginning of my PhD. I was still figuring out what I wanted to actually do, but it was a great way to, even just doing the application process was a great way to cement my ideas and really focus what was most important to me in my research and where I wanted to head. So even if I hadn't gotten it, for me, that experience of going through the application process was super valuable. So I'd say that to anyone who's applying now, like, don't just think of it as a means to an end to get a Fulbright. Think of it as a way to refine your project questions and refine what you really value and what direction you want to head in. So.
Absolutely. That's a really good point. Adam, how about you? Where did you first hear of Fulbright and why? Why did you decide to apply?
Well, so I'd been connected to the Australian Scholarships Foundation for a number of years, and given that they were quite integral into the scholarship with the Fulbright, I knew about them through them. But also the founder of our organisation is an African-American man named Michael Combs, who I'd had the pleasure of working with for so many years. And, you know, being an American, and I'm sure we'll talk about the level of prestige of the Fulbright in the US is just on another level in the States. He was overly familiar with the program, and being an organisation that works with Indigenous university students for employment opportunities, actually we're based on a US model that's been around for 50 years. And so we were sort of talking about not only my own professional development, but also what things could we better understand as it relates to the journey of like-minded not-for-profits in the US. It just kind of all made sense that I would cut out a project, both sort of personally and professionally, to connect with Fulbright.
Absolutely. And how long were you thinking about applying before you actually clicked the submit?
So I put pen to paper at the start of January 2018. And, you know, over the course of the 6 months, even to the day of, I think, the deadline of the application, there was still some things left to be done. But it was a good 6 months lead time.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, Nina, how about you? Where did you first hear about the postdoc scholarship?
I first heard about these scholarships back in 2011. I was completing a summer research scholarship with Monash University, and at that time I got to work closely with a Fulbright scholar from the United States. And I remember her kind of telling me about her program. I remember thinking that it sounded like a really unique exchange program and a really amazing opportunity for her. And since then, I kind of just kept a close eye on the program, and particularly over the last couple of years. But for me, you know, it was timing that was crucial. So I really felt that kind of 2020 intake provided a significant opportunity for me to really build on the findings made by my research group. And, you know, there are a few, I guess, really key factors that motivated me to apply in the end. First, you know, I was lucky enough to have met and known a number of Fulbrighters along the way. And, you know, they've been people of such strong kind of character and integrity, and they've had a great passion for their work that's contagious, and they've been really generous with their time and expertise, and I've seen how their kind of career trajectories have been transformed by their Fulbright experiences. And that was kind of a key, you know, those qualities personally resonated with me, and they were things that I suppose I aspired to, you know, achieve over my career. And I think that was a key kind of one of the factors that motivated me to apply in 2020 or 2019 in the end.
Absolutely. Giri, so how about you? When did you first hear about it, and why?
For me, towards the end of medical school, I was starting to think about research opportunities, and it had always been a dream to undertake some research overseas. I happened to be on an international elective in 6th year and met with a really close friend who'd actually got a John Monash scholarship to do a PhD in the UK. And I chatted to him about his experiences and what scholarships he had looked into. And he mentioned that Fulbright was one of the scholarships he looked into. I jotted down all the different scholarships that he mentioned and did my own research. And the Fulbright really resonated with me in terms of the values of this program, and logistically it fit perfectly with what I wanted in terms of timeframes and fundings and alumni opportunities. So yeah, I jotted down the application dates in my diary and really targeted it as a scholarship for my purposes. Excellent.
Look, you've all really hit on a couple of key points there. One is timing. And one is the importance of having like a mentor or a you know, in particular, someone you know who may have gone through the program or knows a little bit about the program, and will know you as a candidate and whether it's right for you and how it can affect you. I think timing might be really crucial for postgrads who are doing a PhD. So Giri, how did this work? Why was this good timing for you to apply?
That's a great question. I think for me, and maybe similar with Hannah, is doing a PhD in the United States is quite different to doing one in Australia. They have quite strict requirements for both entry and application, and for how you conduct that PhD. And often it's like a 5 years, no negotiation lock-in. And for me, where I'm working clinically as a doctor, I couldn't quite fit that in. So it worked best for me to undertake my PhD through the University of Adelaide. And what the Fulbright allowed me that many other scholarships perhaps don't is to fund part of my PhD and part of my research in the US, and allow me to conduct that in the US, although the granting institute is my university here in Adelaide. And so there was a great deal of flexibility with timing for when I could go over, and it just worked with that type of logistic.
How about you, Hannah? So how did the timing work for you?
Yeah, I mean, it was very similar to Giri's response. The idea of doing a PhD entirely in the United States didn't fit with sort of my direction for a variety of reasons. And one of those is because I have an apartment and a husband here in Western Australia who I wouldn't have been able to take with me. So 7 months was quite enough time for that. And the other part of it being great timing was that I was able to do it in the second year of my PhD. So it was a time in my PhD where I had finished all of my field work and most of my laboratory analysis, because it was towards the sort of towards the end of my second year. And I was able to then be doing a little bit of my PhD while over there, but pretty much 100% focused on that project, putting my PhD on a little hold and then coming back at the beginning of my third year to do all of the, nitty-gritty writing. And it was just great to have that as a bit of a PhD holiday in a way, even though I was still doing work and research over there. Because when I came back to my PhD afterwards, I was so much more inspired and refreshed and excited about the next steps. So yeah, it's good timing for that reason.
Absolutely. You also all sort of touched on aspects of why the US, why you wanted to head over to the US, and obviously that's a really crucial aspect of the Fulbright application. It's something that selection committees are really going to be looking at, is the rationale for why your study or research must be conducted in the US. Nina, because the application is still probably the freshest in your mind, how did you tie your rationale for researching in the US with your research proposal and the application?
Thanks, Alex. Yeah, this was a really crucial part. I repeatedly received advice from kind of previous Fulbright Scholar recipients who are kind of mentoring me through the process, that you really do need to be convincing as to why your project needs to be done in America and not somewhere else. So I think for me, part of my Fulbright program involved using a unique data set that was housed at John Jay College of Criminal Justice in New York. So I guess in one sense, that provided one obvious kind of answer to the question, why the US? So I talked about kind of why that data set is globally unique, but it certainly wasn't enough. Theoretically, you can work with that data set from Australia. So it was really important for me to kind of think through, okay, why do I actually need to go to the US to do this piece of work? And so I talked about things like, the particular problem that the proposal was addressing as being an issue of bilateral impact. So kind of equally kind of problematic and kind of timely issues for both Australia and the US, and that it was the engagement with academics and stakeholders within the US itself that was imperative to the kind of success of the research. So really kind of framing that educational and cultural engagement as being imperative to achieving the research objectives. That's kind of one way that I linked in that importance of why the US.
Excellent. That's some really good advice there. Adam, how about you? Your research was based on Indigenous entrepreneurship. Is that correct?
Yeah, look, my research, the US has demonstrated, this is the way that I looked at it, is that the US has demonstrated, despite what we see with recent racial tensions and the obvious widespread disadvantage that we see among racial minority communities, the US, I have believed, has demonstrated some serious prosperity building for minority people through the lens of not-for-profit organizations doing deliberate work over an extended period of time, unlike anywhere else that I've seen, certainly in a greater scale and history than we've seen in Australia as it relates to Indigenous people. And so for me, it was more looking at this in a systematic way to look at, well, what has the history been for the particular host organization that I intended to go to, and that actually has direct roots back to the civil rights movement, which is a movement unlike anywhere else in the world. So I think that through a bit of research, although I knew this going into it, but through a bit of research and understanding the nature of what I was actually looking at and its history as it relates to the United States, seemed glaringly obvious that it was unlike anything else anywhere. So for me, it was really simple for me to be able to draw that delineation. And not only that, but the fact that the model of the program in the not-for-profit that I work for is a direct descendant of a not-for-profit in the United States.
That's a great answer. Again, it just just finding that angle that you can look at your research or proposal for study, the angle that where suddenly you're looking at it and it just makes the most sense, why this needs to be done in the US. Giri, how about you? You from a, you were doing medical research. How did you sort of justify that rationale for why the US, why Stanford?
I think initially I was drawn to the US for a couple of reasons. I think in the medical fraternity, we often have quite close ties with the UK. I think it seems to be a more commonly used path, just because we have that Commonwealth link, I suppose. And certainly in the head and neck cancer space, North America are world leaders in their management paradigms. And I was always really interested in their approach to management of this disease. So I was attracted to the US, and I thought it was fantastic that it was an area that
looks like we've...
Not a lot of my colleagues who comes, and obviously the US have, some of the most prestigious and well-renowned academic institutes in the world. I found that my supervisor and his laboratory at Stanford really closely aligned with my research interests, and so it was just at that point a no-brainer and a perfect fit.
Absolutely. Hannah, look, we mentioned that in retrospect, the rationale for why the US makes a lot of sense for you, but back in 2017, perhaps it wasn't so clear. So, what we think?
Well, yeah. So we have had a research relationship with, in particular, Australia and the Western United States in regards to fire management and fire ecology research for quite a long time. And the main reason behind that is because we have a lot in common in terms of our environments and how they regenerate, and how we're being similarly impacted by increasing frequency and severity of fires. So I'm certainly not the first person to have noticed that we have these shared issues. And in fact, there was already a really great link forged between my university and UC Berkeley through a Fulbright Scholarship in the reverse way. So in 2015, I think it was, Professor Scott Stevens came over on a distinguished chair Fulbright from UC Berkeley to do a Fulbright at the University of Western Australia, where I am. And actually, I didn't meet him then because I was still in undergrad, but he was in my laboratory then working with my supervisor. And he ended up being the supervisor that I went to work under at UC Berkeley, because we're basically nurturing this cross-continental collaborative research in order to try and solve some of these common problems that we have.
Absolutely, and that's great. I mean, if you can find an existing Fulbright link at your institution, that could potentially, add some legitimacy or authenticity to your project. But that's not to say that you need to have that existing link, because you could be the first person to make that first connection between universities. So another pretty unique aspect of the Fulbright application is the personal statement. So Giri, I mean, we see this as an opportunity to tie your own personal motivations for your research to your application. And Giri, how did you do that? How did you add that personal element?
For me, the key, I think, is to be quite introspective and to make it personal, which sounds obvious given it's a personal statement, but I think there is a trap to feel like you need to write something that other people want to hear, for example. But I think the key is really just to think about exactly what your motivations are. And I think the fact that you're thinking about the Fulbright and you're thinking about research or furthering your professional career all speaks volumes for who you are and your motivations. And so I think you just need to be a little bit true to yourself, and really dig deep and work out what's motivating you, and put that down into your application. And I think as part of that, it's worth thinking about, you know, perhaps things that have shaped you over your lifetime. For me personally, it was a desire to improve. I kind of, without going into too much detail, just mentioned about how my family had migrated from India with a desire to kind of create a better life. And growing up, I felt a need to continually improve and to provide a better life for my family. And so it was this idea about each generation trying to improve from the previous. And that was essentially my, you know, how I framed my personal statement.
Excellent. That's a fantastic answer, because really, it is about being authentic and genuine. It's about, you know, the committee is going to be reading this and really looking to see that you have this bona fide passion for your research. You know, you don't have to ham it up. You just have to be authentic. Nina, how about you? How did you approach this personal statement?
Yeah, I really resonate with Gary's comments. I think initially I found it really difficult. It was unlike anything else I'd previously written. So I spent a good week staring at my computer, just kind of waiting for these words to jump on a page. But I think, you know, and I think, again, part of that was around, you know, my kind of preconceived ideas around what a personal statement should look like. And I felt that I didn't necessarily have something particularly, I guess, remarkable, for want of a better word, to speak to. But I think once I, again, from some good advice from a previous scholar, once I let go some of those expectations around what I felt like the statement should look like, it ended up being pretty straightforward. An opportunity to, you know, provide a narrative about who I am as a person, why I do what I do, kind of what I hope to achieve through my work, and I suppose the role of Fulbright or the Fulbright program in helping me to kind of set that vision in motion. I kind of took it as an opportunity as well to highlight, I guess, particular aspects of the Fulbright selection criteria that may not have materialized in the rest of my applications. So kind of ways that I might have demonstrated adaptability, ambassadorial skills, that kind of passion for engaging with my research and sharing my research with the broader community, and kind of, like Gary said, talking about how you know, my experiences outside of academia have also, you know, shaped my kind of personal and professional identity. So talking about other things that I'm kind of interested in and enjoy and that I'm passionate about, and just taking it as an opportunity to provide a fuller picture of who you are and why you do what you do.
That's great. And another key point there from Nina about using it as an opportunity to add in things that don't easily fit into the other sections of the application that still might add value. Adam, how about you? The personal statement, how did you use that as an opportunity?
A deeply reflective experience. And I also found myself going back and forth with my project statement. As I was sort of building it, my project statement sort of evolved as I continued to write and think deeply about what I was trying to achieve as a Fulbright scholar. And through that, the key question that I sought to answer in my personal statement was, why am I so passionate about this work? Why am I so passionate to try to find and achieve these outcomes, which I'm writing about in my project statement? And it was deeply reflective. I went back into, you know, I think even my childhood, I may have made reference into the fact that as an Aboriginal person, the programs that we saw came and went in the community only stuck around for a couple of years. And one of the key things that I was trying to solve was learning from not-for-profits in America that serve racial minorities over a 100-year period. how can you sustain a not-for-profit for minority people for that long? It's just unheard of in Australia. And so for me, it was this kind of a somewhat emotional realization, but also this drive to see that we've got to build more sustainable programs for Aboriginal people. And I've referenced some experiences that I had growing up. The other side to it for me also was that the nature of my application was looking at professional job opportunities for minority people, and the fact that as Aboriginal people, we don't have many professionals that are from our communities. And so again, it was deeply reflective, and I sort of went back and forth hand in hand with the project statement.
Excellent. And that point there really jumped out at me. I hope everyone listening has got their pens out, because that's a really crucial point. Each of the components, they're standalone when you're writing them, but really they don't have to be. They should really speak to one another. The what and the who and the why really should all tie in together there in your project statement and your personal statement. So make sure that they're speaking to one another. Hannah, how about you? How did you approach that?
I definitely agree with what everyone said so far. It was actually a really great learning, sort of introspective experience, and it is really hard to talk about yourself. I think particularly for Australians, we're sort of not raised to be people who are boastful, or even, that are outwardly proud of our achievements and who we are and our qualities. But one of the things I did learn on Fulbright is it's okay to be proud of your achievements and to talk about who you are frankly in positive ways. And I got a bit of help with my personal statement in a number of ways. And one of them was to read. I asked my recommenders to send me a copy of the letter that they had sent in. And some of the stuff was just like incredible to hear people talk about you in such a positive way, and very humbling and amazing, but makes you realize there are a lot of crossovers. It wasn't just these people making things up to make me sound good. There were actually qualities that I had, and I recognized in myself sort of after, I guess, confirming that other people also recognize those things. And then also I got a lot of feedback from both I sent a copy of my draft personal statement to both my supervisor, who knows me in a very professional context, and also my dad. So obviously somebody who is biased and knows me very well. And they both gave me really great feedback. And one of the things they both said, because I had said, oh, I think I'm being too silly in this. I've said, I've made a little couple of jokes about sort of who I am, or, I've said some silly things because I'm not a very sort of stoic and serious person. And they were like, no, that's great. Like, keep those things in. That's who you are as a person. Like, you're not a serious person. So that's okay. And I think that I hopefully think that worked out quite well. So,
absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Really, really great advice. It sounds obvious, but be yourself. Again, just going back to that authenticity. So it really segues quite well into the next question, and I'll keep it with you, Hannah. Referees. We always get asked about referees. Why did you choose? Who should I choose? Should I pick a variety of people, or should I just go for the most senior people possible? There's no absolutely right answer. I'm sure people have been successful in both categories. But for you, how did you go about choosing your referees, and why?
So I decided to choose 3 referees who were from sort of 3 different aspects of my life and who knew me in 3 different sort of capacities, but also they were 3 people who knew me very well, even if it wasn't a professional capacity. We were also friends and they were also mentors to me. So I chose my supervisor of my PhD, who was also one of my favourite lecturers in undergrad, and she was also my honours supervisor. And so she'd known me at that point for about 2.5 years. So she knew my academic record. She was very familiar with my work and my achievements in an academic sphere, but she also knew me personally and knows me personally. The other one was my former employer. So he employed me for 6 years with a startup business that he had, and I helped him. I was his first employee, and I worked with him for 5 years, and we helped his business to grow together, which was really cool, and at the same time formed a really close friendship. So he was my boss and my mentor, but also my friend. And the third person is actually my primary school principal. She's somebody that I've stayed in contact with because she's very good friends with my mum. So she was more of the personal side of things, and I guess could be someone who could vouch for the fact that that authenticity, I guess, that I sort of always have been this outgoing, sort of very social person who's obsessed with creating communities and trying to, do the best, in big groups of people that I can. So yeah, it was three very different people. That's why I chose.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. And just quickly, sorry, was it your high school principal or?
No, my primary school principal.
So did she write the reference as your principal from primary school, or as someone who'd known you for?
I think she actually wrote it as someone who'd known me first of all.
Sure.
Yeah. But she's also a family friend. So.
Yeah, excellent. Okay, Nina, how about you? How did you go about choosing your referees and why?
Yeah, I again resonate with Hannah's comments. I think I was really keen to, get the mix right. So kind of, I chose three people who knew me very well, but in different contexts. Someone who could speak about the aspects of kind of my research, my kind of professional personality, but also some more kind of comments around my personal attributes as well. I think I did, so they were all individuals who were quite kind of senior in their roles as well, but I was keen to emphasize or select people that I knew who knew me well and who could kind of comment on me as an individual. So I guess what I'm trying to say there is I was keen not to just select. There were other individuals in my kind of networks that I could have selected who were particularly senior or, were particularly respected in areas relevant to what I did, but I ended up going for individuals who could give a full picture of who I was professionally and personally. And I think that kind of was a good decision in the end. So I chose someone who was my PhD supervisor and a kind of long-standing mentor, so someone who could speak to my kind of achievements and work ethic in that sense. I chose a clinical mentor. So I mentioned that I'm a psychologist as well. So I chose someone who kind of trained me as a clinician and who could speak to those more kind of aspects of my interpersonal style and personality in that sense. And I chose a collaborator as well. So someone who I'd kind of established a research connection with, who could kind of speak to those aspects around kind of, my ability to engage with others and kind of establish collaborative networks and so on. And I was really keen to choose individuals who I knew would put in the kind of time and attention and effort that those reference letters needed, because I knew that they were such a critical part of the application process.
Absolutely, and it's all coming back to this idea that we really want your application to be genuine. It's all well and good to get a really super senior letterhead on a reference, but if they're not talking about you as a person, if they're just giving a really broad form letter style overview, then you're better off going with someone who knows you better. Giri, how about you? How did you go about choosing your referees?
I think Nina had some fantastic points. For me, when I think about any application, I think about what the selectors are looking for. And I think they want to know two things. They want to get a sense of, does this person have a track record of success and achievement, and are they on an upward trajectory? And I think they also want to get a really good sense of who this person is. And I think you can learn a little bit about both of those things through referees. So in terms of track record, I think you want to get a referee who themselves has a bit of a track record, someone who's successful, who's, whether they're senior or not, or what level they are, has this person have a bit of a track record themselves? And then I think to the other thing, getting a sense of who the applicant is, I think we all are the sum of the people we associate ourselves with. And so I like to choose referees who I'm proud of, who I think are great role models, and who I like to associate with and who know me well. So those are the two things that I look for when I choose a referee.
Excellent. It was really, really great advice there. And something that you picked up on about upward trajectory is a really good point, because just related to the application in general, there's this myth that you have to be a straight HD student to get a Fulbright. And if you have any sort of, checkered history on your transcripts, you're just not going to be considered. And that's just not true. We're looking for trajectory and achievement within means. So don't let a couple of fails or something on your early transcripts, your early years of your transcript to put you off applying, because again, if you're demonstrating trajectory and improvement, then you absolutely will be considered. So Adam, what are your thoughts on referees, how you choose them, and why?
There's very little I could say that hasn't already been said, apart from the experience of, well, there's a con to finding someone incredibly senior, which was, one of the referees that I chose, one of the most senior people that I had in my network that could speak to my achievements and trajectory well enough. It was one of the final things outstanding when I was trying to submit my application, not realizing that they hadn't actually submitted the reference. So at the final hour, I was actually overseas at the time, and everything else was in order. So I was sort of hitting the phone quite hard, trying to get this bloody reference letter sorted out, which for the reasons, the fact that I'm here meant that I got it in, but it would have been a tragedy if I didn't.
All right, excellent. That's a great answer. How about the interview? Adam, I'll keep it with you. Adam, you seem like someone who isn't too fazed by interviews, but what was before you went in, what was your game plan? What did you want to make sure, what touch points did you want to make sure you hit? Or did you go in with no game plan?
Yeah, I had a pretty comprehensive game plan. I wrote down a lot. I think that for me, what really mattered was, yes, the preparation in the days leading up to it, that you want to know that you're front of mind, you've got all the stuff that you wrote about in your application and so forth. But on the day I rewrote, maybe a good handful of bullet points of things that I knew I wanted to convey in one way, shape or form. I also wanted to find out anything particularly relevant about my area of research as it relates to Australia and the United States that I could speak to as examples. So I think that, like, for me, the game plan was examples, examples of my own personal life, examples of the current situation as it relates to this research area, examples of my own achievements, and not being afraid to as Hannah said, that boastful side, which we're not necessarily trained in as Australians, and just be comfortable and confident with that.
Yep, excellent. And Hannah, how about you? How did you plan to tackle the interview?
I was sort of laughing when Adam was saying how well prepared he was. I probably was not as prepared as I should have been. I actually felt after the interview that I had probably stuffed it up. So I did beforehand. I obviously knew my project really well, and I had the advantage of having done my honours and already having had started my PhD in the same area that I wanted to move into my Fulbright with. So I didn't have to sort of, relearn anything in order to talk to that. And also because I had been thinking about the application process for so long and the links with the United States, I could just sort of naturally talk about that because it was something I was very familiar with. So I guess in that way I did prepare, but I didn't sort of sit down and prepare mock interview questions or anything like that. I think I would have benefited from that because I probably went off tangent quite a lot in the interview, and at the end it's that thing where you sort of black out in an interview and you couldn't remember what happened, but I do remember fist bumping everyone at the end of it, which is not something I normally do. So it's kind of gone that badly, but yeah, I would say be a bit more prepared than me going into it, but maybe also don't be too uptight and too rehearsed. Still be yourself. They don't just want to hear someone parroting sentences from your application because they've already read that. They want to meet you and get to know you as a person. So that's the advice I'd give.
Absolutely, and that's great advice. And something that you mentioned just about thinking that you had failed the interview afterwards. I actually hear that a lot. I hear that from so many successful Fulbrighters. And perhaps it occurs to me that the reason why is, it's a cultural exchange program, and I've found that I'd say 99% of Fulbrighters that have selected have a really intangible air of being quite humble. And it's kind of hard to give someone advice on that. But just from experience, I've seen a few people who probably would have made it through strike out a little bit, because while absolutely agree with Hannah that we're not really used to talking about our achievements, and it is really good to go in and understand what they are and how to talk confidently about them. You really need to strike that balance between confidence and arrogance. You really don't want to talk as though you're the be all and end all, and because maybe the selection committee will be asking themselves, we probably don't need to help this person. They can do just as well on their own. So absolutely, it's some really great points there, and striking that balance between humility and being a bit boastful is really, really important. Nina, how about you? Again, you seem like someone who probably doesn't struggle too much with interviews, but what was your game plan going in?
Game plan. Definitely, I'm one to prepare. So I spent a lot of time kind of thinking through potential questions, practicing those in front of the mirror, practicing those to, family members, and getting feedback around some of that. I think the only thing that I would add in terms of what's already been said is, again, just thinking about, the interview itself is pretty brief. I think maybe 20 or 30 minutes or something in the end. And so I remember going in with this sense, okay, it's probably less about providing too much new information and more an opportunity for the panel to kind of see how I represent myself and my project proposal in person as kind of indicators of how you might go being an ambassador for, your country and for the Fulbright program. So I was really keen to make sure I was able to, sell the importance of what I could do, really show that I was passionate about what I do, communicate that passion effectively, show a sense of kind of confidence in my ability to achieve what I'm setting out to achieve. Thinking about how you articulate your views and opinions with a sense of kind of diplomacy and trying to balance, again, that sense of going into the interview kind of as prepared as I can be, but maintaining a sense of flexibility and kind of open-mindedness and ability to kind of go with the flow in a sense as well. And of course, be yourself. So try to kind of, I wish I fist pumped the panel, but but trying to have that opportunity where you can, like Hannah was saying, engage the panel, show them who you are, looking around the table, kind of trying to connect with individuals, use humor if that's your thing. Just trying to kind of engage and make a connection with the panel.
Absolutely, yeah. Making a connection is really important, and yeah, look, if you can make them laugh, then you'll probably help your own nerves, and you might just get that additional connection with them. And as far as preparation, absolutely agree. Something that I reckon everyone should probably prepare before they go in is obviously just understanding their own application and their own research. Really, if you can, someone put it to me really well. If you can justify it to a barber in a lift, then you've probably got a pretty good elevator pitch, so to speak. Gary, what do you reckon? How do you approach interviews? How did you approach this one?
I have to absolutely echo Nina's response. I think she hit on all the important things as far as I'm concerned. I definitely am one to prepare for interviews, and I actually called around to see if any of my friends had been involved in a Fulbright interview, and no one had. So I didn't really know specifically what types of questions get asked. So I took it back to first principles and just put myself on the other end of the table and kind of thought, what would an interviewer want to know about me in this application process? And I guessed what they wanted was a sense of, like Nina said, you know, how well do you align with the values of the Fulbright organisation, and how good will you be an ambassador for your country and for the Fulbright and your state even. And so I really kind of focused my attention on those two things: how I aligned with the Fulbright values and how I'd be an ambassador for my institution, my profession, my state and country, because after all, the Fulbright is a binational exchange of academia and culture, and so that's where I focused my attention.
Absolutely. Excellent. So look, I just want to step quickly back to the application, because we've had a really good question come through, and I just want to put it to Giri and Hannah, because it's related to postgrads. So both of you postgrad research, how did you actually find your institution? How did you go about, just from scratch, looking up where to do your research and why?
Well, for me, it was very easy to notice where most of the really high impact fire research was coming from in the world. And that's the United States. And within the United States, it's in particular California. So all of the universities across California have some degree of fire research because of the huge issue that it is there. And you know, the huge issue it is here as well means we have some research, but not as much. But of those universities, the one that had the most comprehensive program with the professor that I wanted to work with, Scott Stevens, who I mentioned earlier, that was UC Berkeley. So it was, you know, I knew my area of research well enough to know where all the best research was coming from, and well enough to notice the authors that were recurring on all of those publications. Scott Stevens was one of them, and my hopeful future collaborators also in California, also Fulbrighters as well, Hugh Safford as well, are also from that area. So it was, I guess, a bit of a no-brainer for me. I didn't have to dig very hard to figure that out, but that's how I chose UC Berkeley and Scott Stevens.
Absolutely. Giri, how about you? I mean, head and neck surgery is probably a little bit more niche. So how did you go about looking for your host?
I think it's really important to get this right, Alex. And I actually got some fantastic advice during med school when I was thinking about research and doing some research overseas. A role model said to me, there are three criteria that need to fit if you're going to be successful in doing this. And that is having a project that fits, something that you are passionate about, something that you're interested in, that having a supervisor that fits. This is someone who is a mentor, a role model, a friend, and someone who is supportive. And finally, getting the institution right. And that means, you know, being somewhere where you have the right resources, the right research capabilities, the right people in your team, you know, somewhere that's hopefully prestigious and a great institution. But also, you know, is it a place that you like to live? Is the climate nice? Can you see yourself spending 10, 12 months in that area? And so for me, I actually, this might not be possible for everyone, but I did take some time in the years leading up to my application to actually go over to the US and spend a bit of time in different places and drop into a few different institutions and get a sense of what it would like to be at that institution and to live in that area. And I'd even met with my supervisor at Stanford before my application, and I really got a sense that he would be a fantastic mentor. So I know that that's not necessarily possible for everyone, but I would encourage everyone to think about those 3 points. Is the research that you're going to do fitting with your interests? Is your proposed supervisor someone who is going to be a great role model? And are you going to have all the right capabilities in the place that you're going to conduct your research? And is it a place you'd like to live?
Absolutely. I would certainly just add to that place you'd like to live comment, because while it seems like, yes, this is obviously an academic and a potentially a research thing where you're going to be very focused on a very important project, but it is also about you as a person in a community being an ambassador for Australia and doing other things beyond just your research. So choosing a place where you're going to be able to do that. For example, for me, I love surfing, and I obviously was excited about the prospect I'd be able to get to do that in California, which is pretty exciting. But also there are a number of charities that started up over there, like the City Surf Project, which helps disadvantaged children learn how to surf. It's something that I've always wanted to get involved with. So that was sort of another reason why I was really happy to go to California. And it was one of the things that made my Fulbright a really rich and happy experience. I wasn't just in the lab or in the office 24/7 typing away. I was getting involved with the community and really experiencing what it's like to live there. So make sure you choose a place where you'll fit in, or you'll at least be able to learn how to fit in and engage with the local community.
Absolutely. Look, really good point. And this segues really well into my next set of questions. And let's talk about your Fulbright experiences. Hannah, let's start with you. How did you find living in California for a year?
Oh, it was wonderful. I was only there for 7 months, not a full year. And I was there from the beginning of summer until basically the end of autumn, which meant that it was great for me as somebody who loves sunshine and warmth. It was an incredible learning experience, not just academically, but also personally. I learned a lot about how I can, cope with various things that get thrown at me, various challenges, and also meeting so many new people all at once, which is, can be scary and overwhelming. But I was really sort of stoked that I was able to take that on board and really make the most of it. The connections that I've made through the program have continued to direct my aspirations now. The people that I met there are people that I'm going to continue to work with in a professional context now for hopefully many years, but also people that I made lifelong friends with. And that's something I was not expecting to get from the program. I'm 33, so, you sort of feel like by your 30s that you've probably got all your best friends in the whole world and all your family and all that all pretty much set in stone. But it was a real beautiful experience to go over to the other side of the world, even for only, a relatively short period of time, and make those really deep, meaningful connections with people that are now some of my best friends. I've now, lucky enough to have people that I love and care about over there as well as here, which is a really pleasant surprise and not something at all that I expected would happen. So it's very cool.
Absolutely. How about you, Gary? What's
Sorry, Alex. I just had the most amazing year. I can't speak any more highly about my experience. I think I've talked about my professional experience, but at a personal level, it was just amazing. Just to give you a few kind of personal anecdotes just from today. This morning I woke up and every now and then my girlfriend liked to just recount what we were doing on this day 12 months ago, because she came over with me, and I opened my phone and flipped through to June the 15th last year to look at the photos that were taken around that time. It serves as a kind of a good log of what we were up to. And I saw that the weekend that had just passed in California last year, we were at Stanford at the commencement ceremony, and Tim Cook, the CEO of Apple, one of the biggest companies in the world, $1 billion company, was giving the commencement address at Stanford, and we were in the crowd watching him. The weekend before that, we were driving through Big Sur, the beautiful ragged coastline of California, in a convertible car. And then we flicked through to the weekend after. So next weekend, 12 months ago, where we had driven to Lake Tahoe to go skiing and hiking around a lake. And so that was the 2 or 3 week period this time 12 months ago that we'd experienced, just to give you a sense of how beautiful California is and all the fantastic things you can do when you're not studying. And then in terms of, as Hannah kind of said, those kind of personal connections and those friendships you make, literally 5 minutes before I logged on to this webinar, I received an email from one of my colleagues who I'd done research with at Stanford in the lab, who's now a professor in Japan. And he'd emailed me, my supervisor at Stanford, Eben Rosenthal, and a couple of my other friends in the lab, one who's an oral maxillofacial surgeon in the Netherlands, and another who's a UCSF ENT resident in California. And he had just said that he'd presented some of the work that we'd conducted together in Japan at a congress and won a prize for it. So just to give you an idea of some of the great personal experiences you can have and the connections you can make. And that's just from today, this morning.
That's fantastic. Thanks, Giri. And that's some great advice for life, really, is if you're on a bit of a once in a lifetime experience, make sure you get a photo every day so that you can look back and know what you were doing that day. Yeah. Adam, how about you? What was your Fulbright experience like? You were there for 4 months, is that correct?
4 months, an amazing time. And one of the things that I really treasured about the experience was the response that I received from some pretty amazing people within the minority community. I met with a congresswoman, the first Native American woman elected into Congress on Capitol Hill. I met with the first African American owned investment management firm started by a guy called John Rogers, who was a Princeton graduate, buddies with Barack Obama, and he's on the board of Nike, he's on the board of McDonald's and many other companies. And sitting with him in his office in Chicago was particularly profound. I didn't realize actually that the very office I was sitting in meeting with John, well, I was ecstatic that he accepted a meeting with me to talk about my work. But we were sitting in his boardroom where he explained that when Obama, before he decided to run for president, he called his friend John, met with him in that very room and said, I'm going to run for president and I need this room to build my campaign. And so he used that very boardroom to build what was probably one of the most historical presidential campaigns. And I was incredibly grateful for I think that not only that sort of that location, but the insights that someone like John Rogers, as senior and as known and respected he is in the minority community, and what he was able to draw for me was great.
Absolutely. And look, considering the current situation that we're seeing, over in the United States and really around the world, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you the question. What was your experience like as an Indigenous Australian living in the United States for 4 months? Where there is a bit of a melting pot at the moment with police conduct really under the microscope.
Mm-hmm. I've grown up with racism my whole life, and I did see racism there. I have experienced racism there. The situation that America finds itself, and frankly what Australia finds itself as well, is really of little surprise when you look at the data and the history. In fact, a part of my research was looking at racial wealth inequality and any evidence of programs, not necessarily policies, that can prove a measurable difference in creating a very different narrative. And the fact is that there is, very little evidence, but the widespread poverty and unemployment and lower levels of education that you see in minority communities there and here, is really telling to what type of scenario you might find yourself in when, at the same time, when racial justice, hasn't necessarily been achieved legally, socially, politically, certainly economically. The ingredients are all there for this very situation. I think the unspoken thing that as a Fulbright scholar that spent time in the US, what I was able to see was very prominent institutions, not-for-profits that serve minority people that have been around for a long time, that are very, they're not so much spoken about. When you look at the media and the tragedies, there is a lot of work actually happening behind the scenes that we're not necessarily told, that are creating, fast action. The case, and I'm sorry to bang on about this for the moment, but from an incident like George Floyd to go from crime to prosecution in 4 days, I think really is unheard of. And if we could even borrow that type of speed, then it would be beneficial elsewhere.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, thanks so much for that answer. And I might throw back to Giri. As a person of color, what was your experience like in the United States?
Thanks, Alex. I think it's an important question. I have to say, I was very fortunate that I didn't have any sense of personal, sense of racism experienced. Like Adam, growing up a person of colour, I have experienced racism myself on multiple occasions. But I'm happy to report that where I lived in California, I did not experience anything. And I think I'm lucky. I think California is a special place, and I think they are very progressive, generally speaking, compared to other places in the US. Yeah, I'm fortunate to say that I had a great year, and I never saw or personally experienced any racism.
Okay, well, look, thanks to you both for those answers. Nina, I might throw to you because, again, another, due to the current situation with COVID-19, we've seen some disruption to Fulbright scholarships, and unfortunately, the 2020 cohort have seen some program delays. So can you let us know a little bit about how that situation has affected you and how we're sort of navigating that going forward?
Yeah, I think, so my original plan was to be heading over to the US next month, and then coming back around kind of February, March next year. Obviously with everything going on, it's been a very dynamic situation. So, there's been kind of, initially there was a sense that obviously programs wouldn't proceed if they were commencing in around July, August, and initially the advice was around just kind of, pushing those programs back until things became clearer around, when things might start to resemble normality. And I guess over time, it's become clear that the end of the year is kind of. It's not going to be feasible to be able to commence programs this year. So that's being pushed back until the beginning of next year. But what I would say, it's been a real opportunity to put into practice, those kind of Fulbright qualities around resilience and flexibility and being kind of adaptable depending on kind of the challenges that arise. And the Fulbright Commission, Alex, yourself and your colleagues have been amazing in terms of keeping the communication channels open and really kind of assuring us that, obviously safety is the #1 priority, but these Fulbright programs will happen and there will be an opportunity for you to complete your work overseas. And so, yeah, it's been a kind of a mix of, obviously gearing up and getting really excited to commence your program, and then kind of, coming down as you wait until there will be opportunities to do that. But it just gives me more time to get more and more excited about the work that I'll be able to do over there.
Thanks so much, Nina. Thanks for your optimism and thanks so much for your kind words. We're nearing the end of my questions. So if anyone in the audience, we've got a couple of questions that have come in, but if you have any more, just type them into the chat or hit the Q&A button. Just while we're waiting for a few questions to come in, I'll just ask if any of you could tell us about some of the most interesting or exciting or profound experiences you had while you're in the US. And I might start with Adam. What do you reckon? What was the most interesting or profound or bizarre experience you had while you were there?
Bizarre experience. Maybe I'll go with that one. You know, I said that I would have no limits on the method of research that I would undertake. And so one of the things that I saw in my host organization's basement was all these tapes and like just old pictures and things that date back 50 years. I vowed to myself that I would find a VHS tape player and some kind of recording device to capture what's on them, because they were going to be crucial to my research. And after a long effort running around Chicago, calling people, being hung up on because apparently VHS tape players were outdated and no one had them anymore, eventually found one many hours away that I got and took back to the office, and it didn't work. But I for $10, I should have known. But I then found that I had my bets, and I had made contact with this guy on Facebook from the south side of Chicago, which one thing I knew about Chicago was the south side's not such a pleasant area. It could be quite dangerous. And so I had organized with him to drop it up into the city for me. And he called me up and told me he was in a white van waiting for me under the station with this VHS tape player. And I just saw the headlines then and there that, you know, Aboriginal Fulbright scholar gets kidnapped in Chicago, that I wasn't that excited about. But I saw the guy, looked like a friendly guy, so gave him his $50, got the VHS tape player, and I have to say, one of the best investments I made, because there was some gold on those tapes.
Excellent. Thanks, Adam. How about you, Hannah? What was you know, profound or bizarre or interesting experience?
I can't choose between. I had so many serendipitous experiences actually, but the two that were the most sort of impactful on me, I guess, are the ones I'll talk about now. The first one was in my first weekend in the Bay Area, so that sort of San Francisco, Berkeley area. And I'd gone for my first surf at Pacifica, which is just south of San Francisco City. It's sort of the closest surf beach. And I had decided, because I'd seen them on Instagram actually, this surf club called Traveller, where you can go and pay a sort of a gym membership type fee and use their sort of showers after you have a surf and store your board there and stuff. And so I'd gone there to do that, and it was all very exciting. And as I was getting ready to go out, I was putting some zinc on, and a girl came up and asked me if she could borrow some because she hadn't brought her own. And we got chatting, and then we ended up surfing together all day and got along really well. And then at the end of the sort of time together, we were like, oh, we should swap contact details, because I mean, she's literally the first person I've basically met in America. And we had a friend in common on social media, and it was actually one of my best friends from Perth, who had been on a sort of surf camp in Indonesia that this girl, Henny, who I met in Pacifica in a random change room, had been on, and they had connected and become very good friends. And it was this crazy thing. And so Henny is now one of my best friends, and we basically were inseparable from that point on, which was crazy. So the other incredibly sort of, I guess, crazy, profound thing that happened was towards the end of my time there in November, I was sanding some samples, so tree cores, which is what I did my research on over there. So drilling into a tree and taking out a core and looking at the rings. And so I was doing that in my lab, and I remember looking out and thinking it looked quite smoky, which is not unusual for California. And then about an hour later thinking, oh wow, it's gotten very dark and very smoky for like 2 in the afternoon. And that was the day that the Butte County fires, which are the largest fire that has happened in California's history, had ignited. And we were 250 kilometers away in Berkeley, and the smoke blanketed the entire of San Francisco, the entire of Silicon Valley, huge areas, hundreds and hundreds of kilometers for 2 weeks. We actually got evacuated from the university because the air quality was so bad. And I ended up actually camping out of my car for nearly 2 weeks in Santa Cruz, where the air, because we were closer to the ocean, was a bit clearer, but we still were basically in the, N95 P2 respirators like night and day. So as a fire ecologist, to be there during that was incredibly humbling. It was also it really ignited my, or pun intended, oops, but it really did. It made me realize that I was in the right place doing the right thing. And it's affected me to this day, and it's the reason why I want to continue these collaborative relationships between the US and California, because I think there was a real reason why I was there to be impacted at that time while studying a fire ecology Fulbright. Sort of felt like a bit of destiny, I guess. Yeah. So it was a very scary time, but yeah, something that's been very formative for me.
Absolutely. Thanks for sharing, Hannah. How about you, Gary?
Yeah, I was in the Silicon Valley when those fires happened, Hannah, and that was definitely surreal. For me, Alex, I just want to say one special experience, I suppose. One of the benefits about being over in the US is you can travel within the US, and one of my favorite cities in the world, without a doubt, is New York City. And towards the end of my stay there, I was very fortunate to have organised a little trip for my birthday weekend. Me and my partner went over across from the West Coast to the East Coast to New York, and we spent the weekend in Manhattan. And on the night of my birthday, we had a really lovely meal and a high rise overlooking the city. And so that was super special. So that's a memorable experience for me.
Awesome. Thanks so much. So we've had some questions come in. The first one I'll send back to you, Giri. Can you share any interesting insights in relation to technology and innovation shaping medicine, given Stanford's proximity to Silicon Valley? Great question.
Yeah, brilliant question. I mean, I think that was definitely a massive draw card, the fact that Stanford's right in the heart of the Silicon Valley, and, you know, you get in a car and drive 5 minutes north and you're at Facebook headquarters, 5 minutes south and you're in Apple headquarters, you know, 5 minutes the other way and you're Google headquarters. So, you know, you're right in the heart of innovation. And, you know, everyone there is thinking about ways to disrupt the way we do things currently and normally, and looking outside the box. So it's just an exciting place to be, and you kind of feel like you're so close to the action and like anything's possible. So whether you're in the medical field or not, it's just, you know, you've just got to get there. But yeah, from my point of view, I was excited because I wanted to see how we could harness that attitude of innovation to improve the way we perform surgery. And I think Stanford was the perfect place to do that. My lab are world leaders in these new imaging techniques. And one of the great things is we collaborate really closely with other labs around Stanford, and all of them have that philosophy of you know, adopting new technologies and new processes, being innovative and really leading the field in those kind of areas. So yeah, if you're interested in innovation and technology and how it can apply to whatever field you are in, I'd suggest looking at Stanford.
Excellent. Thanks for that question, and thanks for that answer. Throwing over to Hannah now, a question from Vince. So you were enrolled, it's a bit of a technical question. You were enrolled in your PhD when you applied. Is that correct?
Yes, I was in the first year of my PhD when I applied.
Yep. And so how did you, so it was a PhD from UWA, is that correct?
Yep.
So how did you navigate that alongside Fulbright?
Right. Well, what's super great about Fulbright is it does carry a great reputation across the world, and your university will be very excited that you've got a Fulbright should you get one, and they'll be very supportive in you pursuing it. And what that means is that you're actually able to put your PhD on pause while you undertake your Fulbright. So you don't have to, and you're not expected to, keep working away at your PhD while you're doing your research project in the United States. So the idea is you actually suspend your PhD for however long you are in the United States so that you can fully focus on that project you're doing there. And then when you come back to your Australian university, you unsuspend, restart your PhD, and it's like that time never happened. So you could effectively get an extra, if you were there for 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, you could get that time at the end of your PhD because you paused it. Hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks so
Yeah.
much for that. So I've got a question. So everyone on the panel today, you all applied and were successful on your first try, or did any of you apply previously? No, you're all first timers.
I applied for probably about, I don't know, nearly 10 different similar sorts of awards. I got through to the final round of one or two of them, and then didn't get through, and Fulbright was the one I did. So it was definitely a try and get knocked back and keep on trying sort of experience. Definitely not a easy first time fluke. I think by the time I got around to writing my Fulbright, I'd already been knocked back for about 3 or 4 of the other sort of similar awards. So they were great learning experiences because they helped me to really focus my Fulbright application.
Absolutely. So the question is about reapplying. It's from Celeste, who applied last year but was unsuccessful. So how much change should a second time application have within it? And look, it is a great question. It's a tough one to answer because you probably know that Fulbright, unfortunately, we don't provide feedback on specific applications, but hopefully if you watch sessions like this one that we're doing, you can maybe pinpoint some of the places where your application may have fallen down. If not, if you haven't identified any specific, if you feel like you followed all of the advice and you still were unsuccessful, look, write in, send us an email. We may be able to give you a little bit of advice on how to tackle it this time. No promises, but I mean, if anyone on the panel has any advice, I think Hannah's comments were pretty great about just not giving up and making sure that you, look, one thing I will say is that a huge proportion of Fulbright scholars didn't make it in on their first attempt. I think we just got lucky with this 4 we've got people who managed to make it through on their first time, but many Fulbright scholars took 2 or 3 applications before they made it through. So Hannah and Giri, again, you guys are really popular. Can you speak on how you were able to relate your research specifically to your home states to receive those state-specific scholarships? That's a really good question.
It goes back to finding that institution that really aligns with your research objectives and your research questions. And for me, I was very fortunate, and I think probably Hannah's similar. I'll let her chat about her experience, but the lab at Stanford was doing very similar things to what I'm doing in Adelaide, and so it was just a perfect fit from that point of view. And when you have that, you might not be doing the exact same experiments, for example, and you might be looking at things from a slightly different angle, but as long as you can put forward in your thesis a narrative that brings everything together, then it's really not an issue.
Awesome. Yeah, I agree that it doesn't have to be as specific as my example, which is that we are doing comparative research between 2 Mediterranean West Coast environments that have a similar fire history and a similar issue with projections for the future. But, I have had friends who have had state-specific scholarships with something not that concrete. And I know that for them, it was about contributing something. They talked a lot, and I also talked about this in my application, what I wanted to contribute when I got back here. So it's not just about going away to the States and doing this incredible research and getting a lot out of it yourself. It's just as much about the contribution you're going to make when you come home to your home state. I'm a very proud and lover of Western Australia. It's my home, it's where I've grown up. It was very easy for me to speak about why I wanted to use a Western Australian example to help, put us on on the world stage when it came to fire ecology. We have a lot to contribute to the world in that arena, but we are only we're a large but very relatively low population state. So we don't often get the chance to stand on the world stage. And that was something that I think that we can do and we can continue to do. So for me, coming back to Western Australia and continuing to nurture and build those relationships and give us a great reputation in this area of fire research is something that I put in my application and something that I genuinely am really passionate about.
Excellent. Thanks to both of you. So I've got a question from Lisa about suggestions on how a postgraduate scholar can achieve bilateral relationships between their institution abroad and universities back home. I think I'd say Hannah really hit the nail on the head there. And basically, when we say these connections between universities, it doesn't have to be high-level connections. So postgraduate scholars can absolutely develop and create these connections and continue them. Just about just working with scholars abroad and forging those relationships and continuing the dialogue back and forth. But does anyone on the panel have any more advice on how to either create those relationships from scratch or strengthen them going forward? Maybe you, Giri, how?
Yeah, I could definitely talk to this question. I think you're quite right, Alex. Just by the fact that I was able to go over there and spend some time in the lab with my supervisor and the team there is a huge step in kind of forging that ongoing collaboration, because you come back and you can still continue to collaborate moving forward, and you can continue to share ideas. You can continue to share data even when you're collecting data in Adelaide, and you can write together and publish together moving forward. And even though I've been back for several months now, I still Zoom meet with my supervisor once a fortnight and members of my lab, almost weekly. And it's really fantastic. I've published a couple of papers while I've been in Adelaide that we've done by working together. And so I think you definitely are able to continue to collaborate even when you come home. And I think that has been one of the greatest outcomes for me from this exchange. And I think the other thing that sometimes you forget is when you do go to these institutions, you're often working with people who have come from abroad, from many other countries, and they're also doing exchanges at that institution in your lab. So while I was at Stanford, probably half the people I worked with were from the US, and of those, many were from other places around the US, and probably the other half were from China, Japan, the Netherlands, the UK, and those people go back to their countries. So what you end up having is a very international collaborative set of people to collaborate with. So keep that in mind.
I would just also add to that, not just collaborators or networks or all that, but friends, because that human connection, I think, is the most important part of it. I mean, it is great to have very esteemed, fancy professors that you can email, but even just to have other PhD student friends in other parts of the world that will progress with their careers, and someday in the future you may end up collaborating with, or you may just have really great connections and friendships with. So when you do go elsewhere to do work, you've got a house to stay in or something like that. I think those things are just as important as the professional, formal, networky, email-y stuff, and should certainly not be overlooked. I think making as many friends and building as many connections and continuing to nurture those relationships once you've come home is just the most important part, I think. Has been for me anyway.
Absolutely. Look, great answers there. And look, we're probably approaching the end of our time here. I think I've taken up way too much of all of your time already, but I'll quickly breeze through a couple of questions that just came through. Can you include images in your project statement? I've seen diagrams and graphs and charts, but if you have if you're an artist and you have a portfolio, just put everything in a PDF and upload that to additional documents. There's a question about do we know of any older Fulbright PhD research scholars? Yeah, I mean, it's not, certainly it isn't out of the question. And definitely, I can't think of any specific examples off the top of my head, but there's no age.
I had a friend who was in her sort of mid to late 40s. She was actually a New Zealand Fulbright scholar going to the US. So I met her in the US, but we got lumped together because most Americans don't know we're a different country. But yeah, she was in her late 40s. She had 2 kids. She actually was really enjoying having a bit of time apart from them. She was doing a 3-month project and she was able to leave her kids with her partner and they came to visit, but she actually got to be a bit of an independent person, which was really great for her too. So definitely applied no matter how old you are. She was having a ball.
Excellent. Yeah, absolutely. There's no age limit, so definitely don't let age be a barrier to that. Has anyone from the education discipline successfully received Fulbright scholarships before? Absolutely. We have a specific scholarship just for vocational education and training, for example, but we have many. David Rawson, look up David Rawson. He's a fantastic individual who's specifically in the education field, but write in and we might be able to connect you. There's a great question for Hannah about fire ecology specifically, but I might just connect you. Hannah, if you don't mind answering that one, yeah, awesome. Giri, how do you keep working? In fact, I might connect Alice with Giri afterwards if that's okay.
Okay. Yeah.
It's great. And another great question, a little bit specific. Another question that came in late about making connections. Please write in, send us an email, and I'll let you know. There are some tips that we can give you about finding host institutions in the US. And look, thanks so much to everyone for joining. But really special thanks to Giri, Nina, Adam, and Hannah for dedicating their time this morning. Really some fantastic tips for new applicants. And we really appreciated your time. So I think I'll wrap it up here. Again, thanks everyone for joining. Feel free to send us an email at fulbright@fulbright.org.au. I'll send you all the recording if you wanted to catch up. Yeah, thanks again, and everyone take care.